The execution post was where traitors went to die. And as Seren knelt in chains before the crowd that had once called her family, she did not beg. She did not weep. A heavy silence had settled in her chest, smothering the girl she used to be beneath years of pain and accusation. The crowd whispered. They always whispered. She murdered her own mother, burned her alive while she slept. What kind of monster does that? They were not entirely wrong to wonder. Seren could still smell the smoke in her nightmares, could still hear her mother's screams echoing through the halls of Thornwick Manor. But the hands that lit that fire were not hers. No one believed her. No one ever would. Then the Alpha King arrived, Ridian of Valdrin. Beautiful, merciless, cold as the grave itself. He had come to execute justice, to end the life of a murderer and restore order to a territory that had fallen into disgrace. His executioner stepped forward, blade raised, and tore the fabric from Seren's back to deliver the killing blow. And then he froze. Every muscle in the Alpha King's body locked in place. His pale gray eyes fixed on her exposed skin, on the map of silver scars carved into her flesh, on something else beneath them that made his breath stop entirely. The blade never fell. Instead, cutting through the silence like frost through autumn leaves, the king spoke 3 words that changed everything. "She is mine." The crowd erupted in shock. The executioner stepped back in confusion, and Seren knelt there, trembling, unable to comprehend why a king who had come to kill her was now claiming her as his own. She would not understand for some time. Not until he made his terms clear. He would make her his queen. He would protect her, shelter her, and give her everything she could ever need. But only under one condition. He would never love her. Neither of them understood how impossible that condition would prove to be. The great hall of Thornwick Manor had never felt so cold. Seren knelt on the stone floor, her wrists bound in iron chains that bit into her skin with every slight movement. Her knees ached, her back screamed with pain from wounds that had never fully healed. And all around her, the wolves of her father's territory watched with hungry eyes, waiting for blood. 3 years, 3 years she had lived like this, imprisoned in her own home, beaten when she refused to confess, and starved when she maintained her innocence. Her father, Aldrich, had made certain that every soul in Thornwick believed her guilty. And now, finally, the High Alpha King had come to deliver the justice her father had been demanding. Seren heard him before she saw him. The doors of the great hall burst open, and a presence rolled through like a winter storm. It was not the ordinary dominance of a strong alpha. This was something older, something colder, something that made every wolf in the room bow their heads instinctively. She forced herself to look up. Ridian of Valdrin stood in the entrance, flanked by his personal guard. He was tall, impossibly tall, with hair the color of dark ash and eyes like frozen steel. Rumors claimed he had never smiled, not once in his 30 years. Rumors claimed his touch could freeze the blood in your veins. Looking at him now, Seren believed every word. He walked into the hall as if he owned it, which, she supposed, he did. All territories answered to the High Alpha. Her father had merely been a steward, a lesser lord permitted to govern in the king's name. And now that steward was bowing so low his forehead nearly touched the floor. "Your Majesty," Aldrich said, his voice dripping with false humility, "we are honored beyond words by your presence. Truly, you did not need to trouble yourself with such a long journey. The matter could have been handled locally." "I handle all matters of treason personally." Ridian's voice matched the rest of him. Cold, flat, empty of anything resembling warmth. "Where is the accused?" Aldrich gestured toward Seren without looking at her. "There, Your Majesty, my own daughter, the shame of my bloodline. She murdered her mother 3 years ago and has refused to confess despite every opportunity for mercy." Seren felt the king's gaze land on her like a physical weight. She kept her head bowed, not out of respect, but because she had learned that meeting her father's eyes earned her fresh wounds. She saw no reason the king would be different. Footsteps approached. Measured. Deliberate. They stopped directly in front of her. "Look at me." The command resonated with alpha authority, and Seren's wolf stirred for the first time in years, responding to power that dwarfed anything she had ever encountered. Slowly, she raised her head. Gray eyes met hers. Pale as morning frost, sharp as shattered ice, he studied her face with clinical detachment, cataloging her features the way a butcher might examine livestock. No curiosity, no mercy, no cruelty either, she realized, just absolute terrifying emptiness. "You are accused of murdering your mother, the Lady of Thornwick, by setting fire to her chambers while she slept." His voice carried through the hall. "How do you answer?" "Not guilty," Seren said. Her voice was hoarse from disuse. "I did not kill my mother. She lies." Aldrich stepped forward, his face twisted with righteous fury. "She was found fleeing the scene, covered in soot. Her hands smelled of accelerant. 3 servants witnessed her entering her mother's chambers moments before the fire began." "Those servants are loyal to my father," Seren said quietly. "They would say anything he commanded." A murmur rippled through the crowd. Aldrich's face reddened. "You see, Your Majesty? She is defiant to the end. She refuses to accept responsibility even when faced with death itself." Ridian raised one hand, and silence crashed over the hall like a wave. "I have heard enough." His gaze remained fixed on Seren. "The evidence is sufficient. The sentence is death." Seren felt something inside her collapse, not surprise. She had known this was coming, but some small, stubborn part of her had still hoped. That part of her died now, quietly, without ceremony. 2 guards hauled her to her feet and dragged her toward the execution post at the center of the hall. Her legs barely supported her weight. 3 years of starvation and torment had left her body a shadow of what it once was. They forced her to kneel before the post, her back to the crowd. The executioner approached, a massive wolf with a blade longer than her arm. He would sever her spine in one clean stroke. It would be over quickly at least. "Bear her back," the executioner said. Rough hands gripped the remnants of her dress and tore. The fabric fell away, and Seren heard the collective intake of breath behind her. She knew what they were seeing. She had felt every wound as it was inflicted, had memorized the map of her own destruction. Scars, dozens of them. Silver lines crisscrossing her back in a brutal web, the marks of claws and blades and instruments she had no names for. 3 years of her father's interrogation methods, written permanently into her flesh. But there was something else too. Something she had been born with. Something that had appeared the night her mother died and her father's torture began. A mark in the shape of a crescent moon, resting between her shoulder blades, glowing faintly silver against her ravaged skin. The Luna's tear. She had heard it whispered once, in ancient texts her mother used to read to her. A mark that appeared only on wolves destined for impossible things. She heard the executioner raise his blade, and then she heard a single word, sharp as breaking ice. "Stop." Silence. Seren turned her head just enough to see the Alpha King striding toward her, his face utterly unreadable but his eyes blazing with something she could not name. He stopped beside the executioner and stared at her back for a long, terrible moment. When he spoke again, his voice was barely above a whisper, but it carried to every corner of the hall. "She is mine." The executioner lowered his blade in confusion. "Your Majesty? I said she is mine." Ridian's gaze swept over the crowd, over Aldrich's stunned face, over the wolves who had gathered to watch a monster die. "The execution is cancelled. This woman belongs to me now." "Your Majesty, I must protest." Aldrich stepped forward, his composure cracking. "She is a murderer, a disgrace. You cannot possibly want—" Are you questioning your king? Ridian did not raise his voice. He did not need to. The temperature in the hall seemed to drop 10 degrees. Aldrich shrank back. No, Your Majesty. Of course not. I simply do not understand. You do not need to understand. Ridian turned back to Seren, his expression revealing nothing. You need only to obey. He extended one hand toward her. His skin was pale, his fingers long and elegant. And despite the terror and confusion and exhaustion, Seren found herself reaching up to take it. His touch was cold, ice cold, as if winter itself lived beneath his skin. But it was the first gentle touch she had felt in 3 years. Through the narrow window of the carriage, Seren watched Thornwick disappear behind the hills. She was still shaking, still waiting for the executioner's blade to fall, for this to reveal itself as some elaborate cruelty designed to give her hope before crushing it completely. But the carriage kept moving, the horses' hooves beating a steady rhythm against the frozen road, and Thornwick grew smaller and smaller until it vanished entirely. She was alive. She could not comprehend it. 2 of the king's guards sat across from her, their expressions carefully blank. They had not spoken a word since the journey began. Neither had she. What was there to say? She did not understand why she was here, why a king who had come to execute her had instead claimed her as his own. The carriage was finer than anything she had ever occupied. Velvet seats, thick furs to ward off the cold, windows of actual glass rather than oiled paper. She was still wearing the torn remnants of her dress, her back exposed to the chill air, but someone had draped a heavy cloak around her shoulders before they departed. She wondered if it had been him. The journey took 2 days. They stopped once at a roadside inn where Seren was given a room, a bath, and a meal larger than anything she had eaten in 3 years combined. She devoured it so quickly she made herself sick, then spent an hour in the bath, watching the water turn gray with years of accumulated grime and misery. A servant brought her new clothes. Simple but well made, in dark colors that would not show stains. Seren dressed slowly, her fingers clumsy on the unfamiliar fabric. The dress covered her back completely. She was grateful for that. On the morning of the 3rd day, they arrived at Valdrin. If Thornwick had been a territory, Valdrin was a kingdom. The castle rose from the mountains like something carved from the stone itself, all pale gray towers and sharp angles and windows that glittered like ice in the morning light. A city sprawled beneath it, smoke rising from 1,000 chimneys, wolves going about their daily business in streets that seemed impossibly clean and orderly. The carriage stopped before the castle gates. A guard opened the door and offered his hand. Seren took it with trembling fingers, stepping down onto smooth stone. This is where I will die, she thought distantly. Not today, perhaps, but eventually. Whatever the king wants with me, it cannot end well. She followed the guards through corridors that seemed to stretch forever. Servants paused to stare as she passed, their eyes curious but not hostile. No one sneered at her. No one whispered murderous under their breath. It was disorienting. They stopped before a heavy wooden door. A guard knocked twice, then pushed it open. His Majesty will see you now. Seren stepped inside. The room was a study, all dark wood and leather-bound books, a fire burning in the hearth despite the chill that seemed to emanate from everywhere else in the castle. And standing by the window, his back to her, was the Alpha King. He did not turn when she entered. "Close the door," he said. She did. The click of the latch seemed impossibly loud in the silence. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Seren stood by the door, her hands clasped before her, trying to slow her racing heart. She could feel the cold radiating from him even across the distance, that unnatural winter that seemed to live in his bones. "You are wondering why you are here," he said finally. "Yes, Your Majesty." He turned. In the firelight, his features were sharper than she remembered, more severe. His eyes found hers and held them. "I require a mate," Seren blinked. Of all the explanations she had imagined, this was not among them. A mate, she repeated. A queen, he clarified. Someone to stand beside me at formal functions, someone to bear my heirs, someone to fulfill the role that has remained empty for far too long. And you chose me? She could not keep the disbelief from her voice. A convicted murderer? A woman you pulled from the execution block? The charges against you were clearly fabricated. His tone remained flat, factual. The scars on your back tell a story your father's witnesses did not. 3 years of torture does not suggest guilt. It suggests silencing. Seren's throat tightened. You believe me? I believe evidence. He moved away from the window, closer to the fire, though she noticed he did not seem to draw any warmth from it. Your guilt or innocence is irrelevant to our arrangement. I required a mate who would not expect love, who would not hope for affection, who would accept the terms of a purely contractual marriage without complaint. His eyes met hers again. A woman who has spent 3 years in chains expecting death seemed an ideal candidate. The words should have hurt. Perhaps they did, somewhere beneath the numbness. But Seren found herself nodding slowly. What are your terms? She asked. You will be my queen. You will have everything you could desire. Wealth, comfort, protection, influence. Your father will never touch you again. He paused. In exchange, you will give me heirs. You will appear beside me at necessary functions. You will not ask questions about matters that do not concern you. And love will not be part of our arrangement. His voice hardened slightly. I am incapable of it. Do not expect affection from me. Do not hope for tenderness. Do not fool yourself into believing this is anything other than a transaction. Seren considered this. 3 days ago, she had been kneeling before an execution post, waiting to die. Now she was being offered a crown, protection, a life beyond the walls of her father's prison. Cold over death, she thought. I will choose cold over death every time. I accept your terms, Your Majesty, she said quietly. They are more than generous. Surprise crossed his expression. Most women would weep at such an offer. Most women have not spent 3 years wishing for death. Seren met his gaze steadily. You are offering me life. I will not complain about its temperature. For a long moment, the Alpha King simply stared at her. Then, so briefly she almost missed it, the corner of his mouth twitched. The mating ceremony will take place in 3 days, he said. My staff will prepare you. He turned back to the window, dismissing her. Seren bowed and left. The morning of her mating ceremony, Seren woke before dawn. The chambers they had given her were larger than the entire house she had grown up in. A massive bed draped in silver and white, wardrobes filled with gowns she had never requested, a bathing room with water that ran hot at the turn of a handle. She had spent the first night simply wandering from room to room, touching surfaces, convincing herself this was real. The servants who attended her were gentle. They bathed her in rose-scented water, brushed her hair until it shone, dressed her in fabrics so soft they felt like clouds against her skin. None of them looked at her back. She was grateful for that. One of them, an older woman named Petra, had explained the ceremony to her in quiet, patient detail. The mating bond between wolves was sacred, formed through a claiming bite exchanged between partners. But the king had specified that the physical claiming would occur later, in private. The public ceremony would involve only vows and the signing of contracts. Seren had nodded, not trusting her voice. She did not know whether to be relieved or terrified. Now, dressed in a gown of pale silver that covered her back completely, she followed her escort through the winding corridors of Valdrin Castle. The great hall where the ceremony would take place was 3 times the size of Thornwick's. Crystal chandeliers hung from vaulted ceilings. Nobles in their finest clothes packed every available space. craning their necks for a glimpse of the mysterious woman their king had chosen. And at the far end of the hall, standing before a dais draped in white, was Rydian. He wore black, because of course he did. Formal attire that emphasized the breadth of his shoulders and the severity of his features. His pale hair was swept back from his face, and his gray eyes tracked her approach with that same clinical detachment she remembered from their first meeting. But there was something else there too, something unreadable. The whispers started before she reached him. Is that her? The murderer from Thornwick? Why would he choose someone like her? She must have bewitched him somehow. Seren kept her gaze fixed straight ahead. She had survived 3 years of her father's dungeons. She could survive whispers. The ceremony itself was brief. An officiant in ceremonial robes spoke words about duty and bloodlines, and the sacred bonds between alpha and mate. Seren barely heard any of it. She was too aware of Rydian standing beside her, radiating that strange coldness that made her wolf whimper in confusion. Do you, Rydian of Valdren, High Alpha of the Northern Territories, take this woman as your mate, your queen, your bond? The officiant asked. I do. His voice betrayed nothing. The officiant turned to her. And do you, Seren of Thornwick, accept this bond? Do you pledge yourself to your alpha, your king, your mate? Seren drew a slow breath. I do. Then by the laws of our kind and the blessing of the moon, I pronounce you mated. The officiant smiled. You may claim your bride, your majesty. The hall went silent. Every eye fixed on the king, waiting to see what he would do. Waiting for the claiming bite that would seal the bond publicly and permanently. Rydian turned to face her fully. His eyes searched her face through her veil of calm. The physical claiming, he said quietly, pitched only for her ears. You would prefer it done privately. It was not a question. Yes, Seren breathed, if that is acceptable. A shadow of something passed across his expression. Your preferences are always acceptable. Before she could respond, before the crowd could grow restless, he lifted her hand to his lips and pressed a single cold kiss against her knuckles. The crowd murmured in confusion. That was not how it was supposed to work. A claiming required teeth, blood, permanent marks. A kiss to the hand was barely a greeting. But Rydian ignored them all. He released her hand and turned to face the assembly. The claiming will be completed in private, he announced. The queen requires recovery time before such an intimate ritual. I trust no one here will question my judgment on this matter. The last sentence was not a question. It was a threat. The nobles fell silent. Seren stood frozen, her hand still tingling from his touch. He honored my boundaries, she thought dazedly. He could have bitten me in front of everyone, proven his dominance. But he gave me a choice. The celebration afterward was a blur of faces and names she could not retain. Nobles approached to offer congratulations, their smiles false, and their eyes calculating. She responded with the appropriate courtesies, drawing on lessons her mother had taught her years ago, before everything fell apart. She was almost to the exit when someone stepped into her path. Marcella. Her sister stood there in a gown of pale blue, beautiful and cold, and looking at Seren with pure hatred. Beside her stood their father, his expression one of barely concealed rage. You think you have won something, Aldrich said quietly. You think being queen will protect you from what you deserve. Seren forced herself not to flinch. I think the king has claimed me as his mate. I think any harm that comes to me now would be considered treason. The king does not know what you are. Marcella leaned closer, her voice a hiss. When he discovers the truth about what happened to Mother, he will destroy you. He will tear you apart piece by piece and scatter your remains across the mountains. Then I suppose I should enjoy my time as queen while it lasts. Seren kept her voice steady even as her heart raced. Now, if you will excuse me, my mate is waiting. She pushed past them and walked away on legs that threatened to collapse beneath her. The crowd parted as she approached Rydian's side. He glanced down at her, his expression unreadable. "Your family," he said. "Yes. They do not seem pleased with your elevation." "They are not." He studied her for a long moment. Then he offered his arm, a formal gesture that nevertheless brought her closer to that wall of winter cold that surrounded him. "Their displeasure," he said quietly, "is no longer your concern." And despite the terror and uncertainty and the whispers that followed her through the hall, Seren felt something she had not felt in 3 years: hope. The wedding night came with a silence so complete it seemed to swallow sound itself. Seren sat on the edge of an enormous bed, her hands folded in her lap, her heart beating so loudly she was certain it could be heard through the walls. The servants had bathed her in lavender water, brushed her hair until it fell like dark silk down her back, and dressed her in a nightgown so thin it felt like wearing moonlight. Then they had left her alone to wait. She did not know what to expect. The contract had been clear. She would give him heirs. That required certain intimacies she had only ever read about in the books her mother used to hide beneath her mattress. But Rydian had shown no interest in her beyond the transactional. No warmth, no desire, just that endless, terrible cold. 3 soft knocks at the door made her jump. "Come in," she managed. The door opened, and Rydian stepped inside. He had changed from his formal attire into something simpler. Dark trousers, a white shirt unlaced at the throat, his pale hair slightly disheveled as if he had been running his hands through it. In the candlelight, he looked almost human, almost warm, almost. He closed the door behind him and stood there for a moment, studying her with those frost-gray eyes. Serene fought the urge to cover herself, to hide beneath the blankets, to disappear entirely. "You are afraid," he said. "Yes." "Of me?" She considered lying, decided against it. "Of everything." Sympathy, or something close to it, crossed his features. "I will not hurt you." He moved closer, his footsteps silent on the thick carpet. "That is not my intention tonight." "What is your intention?" He stopped at the foot of the bed, close enough that she could feel the cold radiating from his skin. "To fulfill our contract. To begin the process of creating an heir." His jaw tightened slightly. "But I am not a monster, Seren. If you require time, if you need to adjust, I will wait." The consideration in his voice made her throat tight. No one had asked what she needed in 3 years. No one had cared. "I do not need time," she said quietly. "I need this to be over. I need to know what to expect, so I can stop imagining the worst." Rydian regarded her for a long moment. Then he reached into his pocket and withdrew something. A strip of dark fabric. "You're back," he said. "The scars. I noticed you keep them covered even when sleeping." Seren's heart stuttered. "I do not like people seeing them." "Then they will not be seen." He held up the fabric. "A blindfold. I will wear it if that would make you more comfortable. The room will be dark regardless, but this ensures I cannot see you even by accident." She stared at him, unable to process what he was offering. A king, willingly blinding himself for her comfort. It made no sense. Nothing about him made sense. "Why would you do that?" she whispered. "Because you have already suffered enough." His voice remained flat, factual, but there was something beneath it. Something that sounded almost like anger on her behalf. "Whatever happened to you in Thornwick, whatever put those marks on your skin, it will not happen here. You are under my protection now. That includes protection from your own fears." Seren felt tears prick at her eyes. She blinked them back furiously. She would not cry. Not now. Not when she had survived so much worse than kindness. "All right," she said softly. "The blindfold." Rydian nodded. He turned his back to her. "Tie it yourself. As tight as you need." She rose on unsteady legs and approached him. Up close, she could see the individual strands of his pale hair, the faint lines of tension in his shoulders, the way his hands hung carefully still at his sides. She took the blindfold and reached up to secure it around his eyes. Her fingers brushed his skin, and she gasped. He was cold. Not cool, not merely lacking warmth, but genuinely cold, as if he had been carved from ice itself. The temperature seemed wrong, impossible. Wolves ran hot, alphas especially, but Ridian felt like winter given flesh. "Is something wrong?" he asked. "Your skin," she breathed. "It is so cold." A pause. "A family condition. It is nothing to concern yourself with." The dismissal was clear. Seren finished tying the blindfold without further comment, though her mind raced with questions she did not dare ask. The last candle guttered and died. Complete darkness fell over the chamber like a velvet shroud. She heard him turn to face her, felt the temperature drop as he moved closer. His hands rose slowly, giving her every opportunity to retreat, and settled gently on her shoulders. The cold of his palms against her skin made her shiver, but not entirely from the chill. There was something strangely comforting about it, something that reminded her of winter nights by the fire, of snowfall watched from warm windows, of peace. "Tell me if you want me to stop," he murmured. "At any point. For any reason. I will." His fingers traced along her collarbone, feather light, exploratory. He was learning her through touch, mapping the geography of her body without sight. When his hands drifted lower, sliding the straps of her nightgown down her shoulders, she tensed. "Breathe," he said quietly. "Just breathe." She forced herself to obey, and the tension eased slightly. The nightgown pooled at her feet. She stood bare before him in the darkness, vulnerable in a way she had never been before. But instead of the shame she expected, she felt something else entirely: safety. He could not see her scars. He could not judge her broken body. In the darkness, she was simply a woman standing before a man who had promised not to hurt her. And he kept that promise. His touch remained gentle throughout, careful and almost reverent. When they came together, there was a moment of discomfort that made her gasp, but he stilled immediately, waiting for her to adjust, murmuring quiet reassurances against her hair. The cold of his body against the warmth of hers created sensations she had no words for. Frost and fire meeting, mingling, becoming something new. She clung to him as the pleasure built, as her body learned rhythms it had never known, as the darkness wrapped around them like a cocoon. Afterward, they lay tangled together in the sheets, both breathing hard. His arm was draped across her waist, holding her close, and she could feel his heart beating against her back. Fast, faster than his controlled demeanor suggested. "Thank you," she whispered. He did not respond immediately. Then, so quietly she almost missed it, he said, "For what?" "For being gentle, for the blindfold, for treating me like a person rather than a possession." Another long pause. Then she felt him press a single cold kiss to her shoulder before pulling away. She heard him dressing in the darkness, heard his footsteps moving toward the door. "Ridian," she called softly. He stopped. "Will you come back tomorrow?" The silence stretched so long she thought he would not answer. Then, "If you wish it." "I wish it." Another pause. Then the door opened, letting in a sliver of light from the corridor, and closed behind him. Seren lay alone in the darkness, her body still tingling from his touch, her mind spinning with questions. The cold king who could not love, the blindfold he had worn without complaint, the scars he had never asked about. And beneath it all, like a warning she could not quite hear, the unnatural winter that lived beneath his skin. 3 weeks passed, and Ridian came to her every night. At first, Seren told herself it was merely contractual. He needed an heir. This was the most efficient way to produce one, But as the days wore on, she began to notice things that did not fit that explanation. He arrived earlier each evening, sometimes before dinner, joining her in her chambers to share a meal before taking her to bed. He stayed longer afterward, his arm wrapped around her waist, his cold breath against her neck as he drifted into sleep. He asked her opinions on matters of state, listening intently when she spoke, considering her words with genuine interest. And most confusingly of all, he seemed to enjoy her company. "You are staring," he said one evening, not looking up from the document spread across her sitting room table. "I am trying to understand you." "There is nothing to understand." He signed his name to a treaty with precise, elegant strokes. "I am exactly what I appear to be." "A cold king who cannot love?" "Precisely." Seren set down her embroidery, a skill she had relearned since arriving at Valdrin. "Then why do you spend your evenings here instead of in your own chambers? Why do you ask my opinion on trade agreements? Why do you hold me while you sleep?" Rydian's pen stopped moving. He looked up at her, his gray eyes unreadable. "Habit," he said finally. "Nothing more." She did not believe him, but she did not push. There were boundaries between them, invisible walls that neither of them acknowledged aloud, and she had learned the value of respecting walls. Still, she watched him. She could not help it. She noticed that he never seemed warm, not even when sitting directly beside the fire. She noticed that the servants brought him heated blankets several times a day, that his breath sometimes misted in rooms that were perfectly comfortable for everyone else, that his lips occasionally turned faintly blue when he thought no one was watching. She noticed that he grew worse after their nights together. The realization came slowly, pieced together from observations she had not consciously been making. After the nights when their passion burned hottest, when she lost herself completely in his arms, Rydian seemed paler the next morning, more fatigued. That unnatural chill emanating from his skin grew more intense, as if something inside him was freezing from the inside out. "You are unwell," she said one morning, finding him shivering in his study regardless of the roaring fire. "I am fine. You are not." She crossed to him without thinking, pressing her hand to his forehead. His skin was like ice. "Rydian, this is not normal. Something is wrong with you." He caught her wrist, pulling her hand away. His grip was gentle but firm. "There are things about me you do not know," he said quietly. "Things you are better off not knowing. Then tell me. Help me understand." "No." The word was final. Absolute. "You will give me heirs, Seren. You will stand beside me at formal functions. But you will not involve yourself in matters that do not concern you. That was our agreement." The dismissal stung more than she expected. She pulled her wrist free and stepped back. "As you wish, Your Majesty." Pain, perhaps, or regret, crossed his expression, but he said nothing as she turned and walked away. That night, he did not come to her chambers, nor the night after. Seren told herself she did not care. This was a transaction, nothing more. She should not have allowed herself to forget that. But on the third night, when her door finally opened and Rydian stepped inside, she felt her heart lift despite everything. "You came back," she said softly. "I could not stay away." The admission seemed to cost him something. He stood in the doorway, his hands clenched at his sides, his jaw tight with some internal struggle. "I tried. I told myself this was becoming too complicated, that I needed to maintain distance. But I found myself walking here regardless." "Why?" He crossed the room in 3 long strides and pulled her into his arms. The cold of his body seeped through her nightgown, but she did not care. She pressed herself against him, wrapping her arms around his neck, holding him as if he might disappear if she let go. "Because I cannot stop thinking about you," he breathed against her hair. "Because the thought of you lying here alone while I paced my chambers like a fool was unbearable. Because somewhere along the way, this stopped being a transaction." Seren's heart raced. "What is it now?" He pulled back just enough to meet her eyes. In the candlelight, his features were softer than she had ever seen them. Vulnerable in a way the cold king should never be. "I do not know," he admitted, "but I want to find out." That night, when they came together, it was different. Slower. More intentional. He touched her as if memorizing every curve and hollow, whispered her name like a prayer, held her afterward as if she were something precious and fragile and infinitely valuable. And Seren, lying in the circle of his arms with his cold breath against her neck, admitted to herself what she had been denying for weeks. She was falling in love with him, the cold king who could not love. The man who had warned her not to expect affection, not to hope for tenderness, not to fool herself into believing this was anything other than duty. She loved him anyway, and she had absolutely no idea what to do about it. 2 months after their mating ceremony, Seren missed her bleeding. She noticed immediately. Her cycles had always been regular, even during the worst years in her father's dungeons. The absence could only mean one thing. The healer confirmed it the following morning. Seren sat in her chambers afterward, one hand pressed against her still flat stomach, trying to process the magnitude of what was happening. She was carrying the king's child. The purpose of their arrangement was fulfilled. He has what he needs now, she thought, and the realization turned her blood to ice. He has his heir. He does not need me anymore. She remembered his terms with terrible clarity. Heirs to secure the succession, appearances at formal functions, nothing more. He had been explicit that their relationship would not extend beyond necessity. And now, that necessity was ending. The days that followed were torture. Seren waited for him to pull away, to retreat behind those walls of ice and formality, to become once again the cold king who had claimed her from the execution block. But he did not pull away. If anything, he drew closer. He came to her chambers earlier each evening. He stayed longer, sometimes through the entire night, holding her against his chest as the fire burned low. He spoke to her about his childhood, about his parents, about the loneliness of being raised to rule an empire while being forbidden to feel. And he listened when she finally, haltingly, told him about Thornwick. "My mother was the kindest person I ever knew," Seren said one night, her head resting on his chest, his cold fingers tracing patterns on her arm. "She protected me from my father's cruelty, shielded me from his rages, and then one night, while I was visiting relatives 3 territories away, she died in a fire. Your father blamed you. He said I had done it somehow. Used magic I did not possess to murder her from a distance." Her voice cracked. "He said the marks appeared on my back as proof of my guilt. That the Luna's tear only manifests on wolves corrupted by darkness." "That is a lie?" Rydian's voice was sharp. "The Luna's tear is a blessing, not a curse. It appears on wolves destined for impossible things." "How do you know that?" A pause. Then, "There are books in my library that contain knowledge most have forgotten. Ancient texts about the old magics, the bloodlines, the marks." His fingers stilled against her skin. "Your father tortured you for 3 years based on a superstition he invented himself." The rage in his voice was cold, controlled, but no less terrible for it. Seren shivered. "It does not matter now," she whispered. "I am here. I am safe." "You are," he agreed. "And you always will be." She wanted to believe him. She wanted to believe in this fragile thing growing between them, this warmth that had no right to exist in the presence of so much cold. But doubt gnawed at her constantly, whispering that it was too good to be true, that he would leave her the moment the child was born, that she was foolish to hope for anything more. 3 months after their mating ceremony, she could not bear the uncertainty any longer. "I am pregnant," she told him. They were lying in bed, the candles guttering low, his arm wrapped around her in that familiar protective embrace. She felt him go still against her. "You are certain?" "The healer confirmed it weeks ago." I did not know how to tell you. Silence. Then his hand moved to rest against her stomach, spanning the slight curve that had begun to form there. We are having a child, he breathed. Yes. She waited for the withdrawal, waited for him to release her, to thank her formally, to announce that their arrangement had reached its natural conclusion. Instead, he pulled her closer. Thank you, he murmured against her hair. Thank you, Seren. The warmth in his voice broke something inside her. Tears spilled down her cheeks before she could stop them. Why are you crying? Alarm sharpened his tone. He sat up, his hands finding her face in the darkness. Are you in pain? Is something wrong with the child? No. She shook her head, pressing her face into his palm. I just thought you would leave. I was afraid that once you had your heir, you would not need me anymore. Never. The word was fierce, absolute. Seren, I know what I said when we began this. I know I told you not to expect love, not to hope for affection. But I was wrong. I was trying to protect myself from something I did not believe I could survive. Her heart stopped. What do you mean? I mean that I love you. The words seemed to tear themselves from his throat, desperate and terrified and utterly raw. I love you, Seren. I have loved you since the moment I saw those marks on your back and recognized a survivor. I love your strength and your kindness, and the way you look at me as if I might actually be worthy of something other than fear. Joy exploded through her chest. Rydian, I love you too. I have loved you for... I love you, he repeated, and this time his voice cracked. I love... He stopped mid-word. His eyes went wide with pain. His hand flew to his chest, clutching at his heart. A sound escaped him, something between a gasp and a scream, and his entire body convulsed. Rydian! Seren scrambled upright, reaching for him. What is happening? What is wrong? He could not answer. Frost was spreading across his chest, visible even in the darkness, crawling over his skin like a living thing. His lips turned blue. His breath came in shallow, ragged gasps that misted in the suddenly freezing air. Then he collapsed. Help! Seren screamed, throwing herself toward the door. Someone help! The king is dying! Guards flooded the chamber within moments of her screams. They found their queen kneeling beside their king, her hands pressed against his chest, her nightgown soaked with the frost that was spreading across his body like a disease. Get a healer, Seren commanded. Now. They obeyed without question. The authority in her voice surprised even her, but she had no time to consider it. Rydian was dying in her arms, and she could not understand why. The frost had spread from his heart to cover most of his torso. His breathing had slowed to almost nothing. His skin was translucent, blue-white, cold beyond anything she had ever felt. And his eyes, when they fluttered open, were glazed with pain and something worse, acceptance. It is no use, he whispered, his voice barely audible. There is no cure. There never was. What are you talking about? Seren gripped his face, forcing him to look at her. Rydian, what is happening to you? A curse. His hand found hers, his grip weak as a child's. On all the kings of my line, we cannot love. The words made no sense. Cannot love? But you just said you loved me. And now, I am dying for it. The healer arrived, an elderly woman with sharp eyes and steady hands. She took one look at Rydian and went pale. Ice curse, she breathed. I have only read about this. I never thought I would see it. Can you break it? Seren demanded. No, Your Majesty. This is old magic, blood magic, woven into the very essence of his bloodline generations ago. The healer's voice was grim. Centuries past, a king of Valdrin sought to make his line immune to manipulation. He feared that enemies would use love against his heirs, that queens and mistresses would control the throne through the hearts of weak kings. So he commissioned a powerful witch to craft a curse that would make his descendants incapable of love. But the witch betrayed him, Ridian rasped from the bed. She made the curse too strong. Instead of preventing love, it punishes it. When a king of Valdrin falls in love, truly and completely, the curse activates. His heart freezes. He dies. Seren shook her head in denial. No, there has to be something, some way to reverse it. The only thing that could counter ice magic of this magnitude would be something of equal power. The healer paused, her eyes drifting to Seren's back, to the place where her nightgown had slipped to reveal the edge of her mark. Something like the Luna's tear. Seren's blood ran cold. The mark on my back? It is not merely a mark, Your Majesty. It is a blessing from the moon goddess herself. A reservoir of ancient magic that appears only once in 1,000 generations. The healer stepped closer, her expression intense. If your mark is genuine, if it truly is the Luna's tear, then you may possess the only magic in existence capable of melting an ice curse. Hope flared in Seren's chest. How do I use it? I do not know. The healer's voice fell. The knowledge of how to wield such power has been lost for centuries. Perhaps if we had time to research, to consult the ancient texts. How long does he have? Seren demanded. The healer looked at the frost creeping slowly across Ridian's skin. The curse progresses gradually once activated. Days, perhaps a week at most. But he will weaken with each passing hour. Then I will find a way. Seren looked down at Ridian, at the frost spreading up his neck. I will not let you die. Ridian's frozen fingers found her cheek. Some things cannot be prevented. This can. She pressed her hand over his heart, feeling the unnatural cold seeping through his chest. I did not survive 3 years of torture to lose you now. She sat vigil beside Ridian through the night, holding his frozen hand, watching the curse slowly consume him. His eyes had closed. His breathing had become so shallow she could barely detect it. The frost had reached his chin, and she could do nothing. There has to be a way, she whispered to the darkness. There has to be someone who knows how to unlock the Luna's tear. The answer came to her like a thunderbolt. Her mother. Her mother had been a scholar, a collector of ancient knowledge, a woman who spent her nights reading texts so old they crumbled at a touch. If anyone had known about the Luna's tear, about the magic Seren carried unknowingly on her back, it would have been her. And her mother's journals, her research, her entire library were still at Thornwick, in her father's possession. Seren rose from Ridian's bedside, her decision made. Guard, she called. Prepare the fastest horses. I am riding to Thornwick. The captain of the guard stepped forward, his expression alarmed. Your Majesty, the journey takes 2 days. The king may not survive. Then I will ride faster. Her voice was ice, harder and colder than anything Ridian had ever produced. Lord Aldrich has something I need, something that may save the king's life. I will retrieve it, with or without your approval. The captain hesitated, then bowed. At least allow me to send an escort. Fine, but we leave now. She rode through the day and night without stopping, pushing her horse harder than she had ever pushed anything. The royal guard flanked her, their faces grim, their hands on their weapons. They reached Thornwick as dawn broke on the second day, having cut the journey nearly in half through sheer determination. The manor looked smaller than she remembered, darker. The stones seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it, and even the gardens had withered into something twisted and dead. Seren dismounted and strode toward the entrance without hesitation. A servant tried to stop her at the door. My lady, your father is not receiving visitors. I am not a visitor. Seren pushed past him. I am the Queen of Valdrin, and I am not here to visit. She found her father in his study, sitting before the fire with a glass of wine in his hand. He looked older than she remembered, his face lined with something that might have been exhaustion or might have been guilt. Beside him stood Marcella, beautiful and cold as ever. You. Aldrich's lip curled when he saw her. Come to gloat about your elevation. I have come for Mother's journals. Seren kept her voice flat. The ones about the Luna's tear. Where are they? Her father's expression shifted. Just for a moment. But she saw it. I have no idea what you are talking about. You are lying. Seren stepped closer. Mother researched the Luna's tear for years. She knew what it was, what it could do, how to unlock its power. You have her journals. I need them. And why would I give you anything? Aldrich rose from his chair, his eyes blazing with familiar hatred. You murdered my wife. You destroyed my family. You do not deserve help. You deserve death. I did not murder Mother. The words came out steady in spite of the rage building in her chest. I was 3 territories away when she died. You know that. You have always known that. The marks on your back say otherwise. The marks on my back are the Luna's tear. Seren's voice rose. A blessing, not a curse. Mother knew that. She wrote about it in her journals. Journals you have hidden because they prove my innocence. Marcella stepped forward, her beautiful face twisted with contempt. You expect us to believe that? You are a murderer, Seren. Everyone knows it. Everyone believes what Father told them to believe. Seren turned to face her sister fully. But think, Marcella. Really think. I loved Mother more than anything in this world. She protected me from Father's cruelty, shielded me from his rages. Why would I kill the only person who ever loved me? Doubt crept into Marcella's eyes. Uncertainty. Father, she said slowly. Where are Mother's journals? Destroyed. Aldrich's voice was flat. I burned those years ago. You are lying. Seren felt certainty crystallize inside her. You would never destroy knowledge. You hoard it. You use it. You buried those journals somewhere you thought I would never find them. Even if I did, I would never tell you. Then I will search every inch of this manor until I find them myself. She turned toward the door, but Aldrich's voice stopped her. You want to know about the Luna's tear? His tone had changed, become something darker, more dangerous. Fine, I will tell you. Your mother discovered that the mark on your back could break any curse, heal any wound, and undo any magic. She was so proud of you, her special daughter, and her blessed child. He laughed bitterly. She wanted to present you to the king, to offer your gift to the royal family. She thought it would elevate our house, bring us honor and prestige. His eyes burned with old rage. But I knew better. I knew that once the king discovered what you could do, he would take you away. Use you for his own purposes. Leave me with nothing. Seren's blood ran cold. What did you do? I did what any father would do. Aldrich's smile was terrible. I protected my own interests. You killed her. The realization hit Seren like a physical blow. Mother found out you were planning something and you killed her. She was going to ruin everything. Aldrich shrugged as if discussing the weather. I could not allow that. So I set the fire and let everyone believe you had done it. 2 problems solved at once. Marcella stumbled backward, her face white. Father, no. You could not have done that. I did what was necessary. Aldrich turned to face his legitimate daughter. Surely you understand that. You murdered our mother. Marcella's voice shook. You tortured Seren for 3 years for a crime you committed yourself. And I would do it again. Aldrich's composure cracked, revealing the monster beneath. That creature is not my daughter. She is a reminder of my shame, proof of my wife's obsession with ancient magic and prophecies. I should have drowned her at birth. Something inside Marcella seemed to snap. She crossed the room in 3 strides and struck their father across the face with all her strength. The crack of impact echoed through the study. Aldrich stumbled backward, blood streaming from his lip, and collapsed against the mantelpiece. He did not get up. Silence fell over the room like a shroud. Marcella stood over their father's unconscious body, her hand still raised. her expression somewhere between horror and satisfaction. Sister. Her voice trembled. I am so sorry for everything, for believing him, for hating you. Later, Seren's voice was firm but gentle. The journals. Do you know where they are? Marcella nodded slowly. Mother's old study. There is a hidden compartment behind the bookshelf. Father never found it. She led Seren through corridors that held nothing but painful memories. The study was exactly as their mother had left it, preserved like a shrine, untouched by the years. Marcella pressed a hidden mechanism, and a panel slid open to reveal a stack of leather-bound journals covered in dust. Seren grabbed them with shaking hands. Go, Marcella said. Save your king. I will handle father. Marcella? Go. Her sister's eyes were bright with tears. This is the least I can do, after everything. Seren embraced her sister, brief and fierce, then ran. She read the journals during the ride back to Valdren, devouring her mother's elegant handwriting by the light of a lantern held by one of her guards. The words blurred together, dense with research and speculation and hope. But slowly, the truth emerged. The luna's tear was indeed a blessing from the moon goddess, a mark that appeared once every 1,000 years on a wolf destined to change the world. It contained power beyond imagining, the ability to heal, to purify, to break any curse no matter how ancient or powerful. But that power could only be unlocked one way, through love. The luna's tear responded to the heart of its bearer. Only when the bearer loved completely, selflessly, without reservation, would the mark activate and release its magic. It could not be forced. It could not be faked. It required absolute emotional truth. Seren closed the journal as the towers of Valdren came into view. She loved Ridian. She had known it for weeks, had felt it growing inside her like a second heartbeat. But she had never spoken the words aloud. She had been too afraid, too uncertain, too convinced that he could never love her in return. Now she understood that her silence might have been killing him. The castle was in chaos when she arrived. Servants rushed through the corridors, their faces pale with fear. Guards stood at every entrance, their expressions grim. The king was dying, and everyone knew it. Seren ran to his chambers. Ridian lay exactly where she had left him, except the frost had spread further. It covered his face now, turning his features into something carved from ice. His chest barely moved. His heartbeat was so faint she could barely detect it. She was almost too late. The healer stood beside the bed, her expression hopeless. Your Majesty, I am sorry. There is nothing more I can do. Leave us. Seren's voice brooked no argument. Everyone, now. They obeyed. The door closed behind them, and Seren was alone with her dying husband. She climbed onto the bed beside him, pressing her body against his frozen form, wrapping her arms around him despite the cold that burned her skin. Her back, bare where her traveling clothes had torn during the ride, pressed against his chest. The lunas tear against the ice curse, fire against frost, love against death. Ridian. She pressed her forehead to his frozen cheek. I need you to hear me. I need you to understand what I am about to say. No response. His eyes remained closed. His breath barely stirred the air. I love you. The words came easily now, pouring out of her like water from a broken dam. I love you, Ridian. I have loved you since the night you wore a blindfold so I would not have to show you my scars. I have loved you since you held me in the darkness and made me feel safe for the first time in 3 years. The mark on her back began to warm. I love your coldness because it is not cruelty. I love your distance because you built it to protect yourself, not to hurt others. I love the way you ask my opinion and actually listen to my answers. I love the way you hold me while you sleep, as if I am something precious, something worth protecting. The warmth spread, becoming heat, becoming fire. I love you. she said again, and this time she felt something shift inside her, something ancient and powerful awakening after centuries of slumber. I love you with everything I am, everything I have, everything I will ever be. And if my love is not enough to save you, then I will die here beside you, because I cannot imagine a world without you in it. Light exploded from her back, silver and gold and white, brighter than the sun, flooding the chamber with radiance that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. Seren gasped as power surged through her, power that was not hers but was hers, had always been hers, waiting for this moment. The luna's tear released its magic. She felt it flowing from her body into his, felt it seeking out the curse that was killing him, felt it wrapping around the ice in his heart and melting it away. The frost on his skin began to recede, retreating like shadows before dawn, vanishing as if it had never existed. Color returned to his cheeks. His breathing deepened. His heartbeat strengthened. And then his eyes opened. Gray eyes, pale as winter frost, but warm now in a way they had never been before. They focused on her face with recognition, with wonder, with something that looked impossibly like hope. Seren. His voice was hoarse, raw, but it was his voice. He was alive. What did you do? I loved you. Tears streamed down her face. That is all. I just loved you. He reached up with a hand that was no longer cold, cupping her cheek with fingers that held warmth for the first time in his entire life. The curse was not just broken. It was destroyed, erased from his bloodline forever. The luna's tear. He breathed. It was you. It was always you. I did not know. She leaned into his touch. I did not understand what I was, what I could do, until it was almost too late. But it was not too late. He pulled her down to him, pressing his forehead against hers. You saved me, Seren. You saved me in every way a person can be saved. We saved each other. She kissed him softly, gently, tasting tears on both their lips. We were both hiding, both convinced we were unworthy of love, and yet we found it anyway. He kissed her back, and for the first time, his lips were warm against hers. 8 months later, Seren stood in the gardens of Valdrin Castle, their daughter sleeping peacefully in her arms. The baby had arrived 3 weeks early, squalling and healthy and perfect. She had her father's gray eyes and her mother's dark hair, and a tiny crescent moon birthmark on her shoulder that made the healers gasp with wonder. The luna's tear. Passed down to the next generation, a blessing that would protect the royal line for generations to come. Ridian found her there, standing among the roses he had planted in her honor. He wrapped his arms around her from behind, careful not to wake the baby, and pressed a warm kiss to her temple. The council meeting went well? Seren asked. Better than expected. He rested his chin on her shoulder, gazing down at their daughter. Your sister has settled into her role as Lady of Thornwick admirably. The territory is flourishing under her guidance. Seren smiled. Marcella had claimed their father's title after his conviction for murder and conspiracy. Aldrich now rotted in a cell beneath Valdrin Castle, stripped of everything he had ever valued, forced to live with the knowledge that both his daughters despised him. It was more mercy than he deserved. And the new legislation? Seren asked. Passed unanimously. Ridian's voice held quiet pride. The persecution of marked wolves ends today. Anyone bearing a blessing from the moon goddess will be protected by law, their gifts honored rather than feared. Seren leaned back into his embrace, feeling his warmth seep into her bones. He was always warm now. The curse had taken his ability to feel temperature properly, had made him cold for 30 years. Its destruction had finally allowed him to feel what everyone else felt. He said it was like being born again. I love you, she said softly. And I love you. He turned her to face him, careful of the baby between them. My queen, my mate. my everything. She thought of that day on the execution block, when she had knelt in chains expecting death. She thought of the marks on her back, the scars her father had given her, and the blessing her mother had recognized. She thought of the cold king who had claimed her, the warmth they had found together, and the impossible love that had saved them both. They had both entered this marriage expecting nothing. She had been a convicted murderer fleeing death. He had been a cursed king fleeing feeling. Neither of them had believed in love. Love had found them anyway. And in loving each other, they had freed not just themselves, but an entire kingdom. Thank you for listening to this story. If you enjoyed it, please let me know in the comments. I read every single one, and they mean more than you know.